Hello, everybody. My name is Deborah Peters, and welcome back to the Deborah Peters Show. This is a show that is all about consciousness, consciousness in your wealth, consciousness in your health, consciousness in, yes, your business, and consciousness in your relationships, and of course, your self expression. Where would we be without being conscious of our self expression? And today I have an amazing guest, and his name is Vinay Raman. He is this amazing data empath, which is probably two terms maybe you haven't put together before, but this show is all about getting outside the box and coloring outside the lines. And so I've invited him today to share with the leaders in this world that are leading teams, that are leading companies, and they're really looking for an edge to be able to take their organization from great leadership into profitable leadership. And thank you so much for joining me today. It's fantastic to have you as a partner and to be able to get your tools implemented into the programs that we run with CEOs. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I very much appreciate the opportunity to have a chat.
Yeah, and it's a lot of fun being able to, and I like the term a lot, data empath, because I'm always on both sides, I feel. It's okay, we're working on the mindset, we're working on, how people are actually showing up and where they're coming from in terms of, are they looking outside themselves for somebody to get them going or motivate them? Or are they actually the type of people that work and live their lives from within?
Mhm.
And so there's always that. And then there's the metrics. And so you have discovered a way, which is why I love working with you. You've discovered a way to bring those two together and actually have one provide really good feedback for the other.
Yeah, if I could tell you a real quick analogy, I love my analogies. One time I climbed to the sort of the top of this mountain when I was on a family vacation, and we get to, well, actually, maybe here's a better way to say it. Have you ever sat next to a window on an airplane and, you're flying over the city that you've been in for, 10, 15, your whole life, whatever the case may be. It's always so fascinating to see that town from that window.
Yeah.
It's the same place. It. You've been on every one of those streets. You've leaned on the light poles, right, on each one of those streets.
Sure.
But it's still amazing. And I think the analogy there is that perspective makes everything so beautiful, right?
Mhm.
And for me, the longest time, I used to think of data as one thing, the data and the numbers as one thing, and then this sort of this heart-centric leadership, this being a human part is something else. But when you go to a high enough perspective, they're actually the same thing together. And that shift in perspective made a huge, huge difference for me in the way I approach the world and my people.
That's interesting. It's so true. It's like, um, whenever I'm in LA, so whenever I leave LA, it's always like, yay, I'm getting out, I'm going somewhere different. And then whenever I come home, it's like, oh, it's so good to be here. But that's from an aerial view,
Mhm.
right? And we all know that LA's got some problems right now. So, but then because then when I get down on the street level, I'm like, I'm ready to go again. And it's so true, because when we're in the weeds in our business, and we're up against it, maybe we've got investors that are constantly hammering us. And I actually have a client that's going through this right now. It's ridiculous, when people are in fear, especially economy is looking a little wonky. So then, the first thing is to start cutting, cut. And it's like, maybe that's not the right answer. So imagine having the right data presented to those investors to really be able to guide the process of what an organization needs to do to maybe weather a storm,
Mhm.
or to get past a choke point, or to, maybe they're at an inflection point, like whatever the situation is, you have to have that information.
Yeah, I've listened to lots of podcasts and I like to I'm a constant sponge for information. And I listened to this podcast by someone named Sadhguru. I don't know if you've ever heard of Sadhguru. It's got a large following of people. And I'm listening to this podcast one time and he talks about this idea. He said, pain is the greatest gift that's ever been given to mankind.
Mm-hmm.
And he says that, and I mean, it's kind of like, the record scratch kind of thing. I was like, wait, what? What are you talking about? As I've learned since that time I first heard that, I used to run the 400-meter dash when I was in high school. I was actually
Mm-hmm.
pretty darn good at that. And about 320 yards into that, your legs feel like anchors, your arms
Yeah.
feel like they're useless, and it just feels like a vice is around your midsection. You're cramping up. Now, the people who win that race and win a lot are the ones who say, you know what, this means it's time for me to start pushing harder, because
Yes.
this is success is on the other side of this. When lots of others who don't run that race and didn't like that race, like, all right, I'm just going to coast it in, right? So sometimes that pain is actually just on the other side of fantastic, right? And
Always.
it's tough to push through
Always.
sometimes, right?
Mm-hmm. You really do, because, I was actually having this conversation recently with a client about, we have this set point for everything, and it's in our brain, and it signifies enough, but enough isn't always where we want to be, right? It's comfort. Enough is comfort. For instance, we have an apostat in our brain that actually tells us, communicates with the stomach, and it tells us when we're full. So the stomach says, hey, I'm full, tells the brain that, and it's time to stop eating. But you can stop eating, or you can actually push through it and consume a lot more food and still be okay.
Mhm.
And that's really what you're talking about. It's like, I've noticed over the years of coaching that people have an apostat for money. It's like, okay, this is the most I've ever earned, so I'm going to pushing forward. I'm going to stop going through past the pain of my limiting beliefs, and past the feedback I'm getting from my environment that is, a socioeconomical structure that I have been fitting into nicely. Like, you have to force yourself almost. You have to have that why. And I know we talked about this when we were setting up the show,
Mhm.
is you have to have that why in order to get past those points.
Yeah, absolutely. I played a lot of soccer when I was a kid, and what I learned as far as soccer skills as a 12-year-old, right? I was trying out for a team. I had to be able to juggle a bar so it can't touch the ground, and I had to
Sure.
be able to do that 50 times, right? And that's what was required for me to be able to make that traveling select soccer team, that regional traveling team. But to make the 13-year-old team, it was no longer just 50, right? It was, I don't know, 75 or whatever the number was, right?
Sure.
So as soon as I reached perfection for a 12-year-old in terms of that's what it takes to make this team, the perfection goal line just moved again, right?
Yeah.
Because I want to make it to the next one.
Yeah.
So you're right. I mean, just like with your body in terms of the nutrition that you give it, you can choose to say, yeah, that's enough for me, or do I want to get to another level of effective? And I use that word effective versus efficient, right? Specifically.
Yes.
Do I want to get to the next level of effective? There's always more. There's always more if you want it, right?
Mm-hmm. It's the school of life. Imagine the little kid entering kindergarten and like not having any idea what this is all about. It's really scary, especially when you're in a school that has older kids, right? But then when you hit the end of elementary school, you're like the king. You've got the lay of the land, you're the boss. You know all the little kids that are coming in, you have dominion over them. But then when you get into middle school, you're at the bottom again.
That's right.
And it's the same thing all over. And that is the school of life. It's constantly raising the bar on ourselves and not stopping. That's really the key here. So, how can we made a big claim going from great leadership to profitable leadership. So, how can having data actually make that difference?
Yeah, I think there's one fundamental shift that had to occur in me in order to allow space for that to occur and to get to this path towards fantastic, outstanding, world-class leadership in my mind. And that is that I stopped looking at data as the answer, as opposed to the place to start asking questions, right?
Really good.
Because I need to know where I'm standing first if I want to take a step forward. And if I say the data is the step forward, well, you won't actually go anywhere because you say, I'm already there. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm full, right? But do I want to eat more? Do I want to go to the next level? Well, then I can start to ask the question. I'm pressing this red button 10 times. do I want to press it 15? Do I want to press it 100? Do I want to
Right.
press it 1,000? Different questions you need to ask. So data is the first step in asking better questions, is the way I think is the first step that I took.
Hmm. Yeah. And I mean, psychologically, um, the quality of our lives and our success, the level of our success, I believe, is determined by the quality of the questions that we ask ourselves.
Yeah.
If you ask yourself, why can't I get this right? Or what's wrong with me? Why can't I do this and get this done? I know a lot of CEOs that struggle with actually moving through things, like just getting past things and making faster choices because they trust their intuition rather than needing to, ask them their whole team to weigh in on it, which could take days and weeks and months. But when we ask ourselves these higher level questions of what's possible, what haven't I thought of yet? What are we not doing that we could be doing? It opens up the brain, the mindset to actually receive greater levels of possibilities.
I mean, it's that 12-year-old. If they were asking that question, how do I get to 50? That question is now ineffective for that 18-year-old, because 50 juggles was something you did so way back then. I can't keep using that same standard of my level of performance as a 18-year-old soccer player. I have a much higher expectation. My coaches will have a much higher expectation. So I need to keep changing the question. Is it possible to do 50? At 12, that's okay.
Sure. Yeah.
13, 14, 15, so on and so forth. I think that's kind of what you're saying as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so opening up your mind to the possibilities, I think that's the first step.
Mhm.
When you're speaking of where are we starting, if you don't, you have to work with people from where they're at. For me, there's two questions to ask. And I always ask the end goal first.
Mhm.
And that is where do you want to be? Because it's pretty obvious that they're not where they want to be, or they wouldn't be talking to me.
Right.
So where do you want to be? What's your end goal? And then where are you now?
Correct.
And so we've got a gap, right? We have a gap. And ideally, the end goal is going to be something that is taking them out of their comfort zone, past something that they've ever accomplished before. Because that's the whole idea here, to not just be a great leader, but to be a profitable leader, is to get out there past anything you've been willing to go after before.
That's right.
So how is the data going to show them how to manage that gap? Because one of the questions everybody asks me is, I don't know how I'm going to get there. How am I going to get there? It's like, well, first of all, you don't need to know how.
Yep.
Right. So just weigh in on that a little bit.
Yeah. So, I mean, if we talk about data as kind of telling you where you're at right now, like that's what's currently being performing, because it's unbiased, objective. It tells you this is where I am today, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you know this endpoint that you're trying to get to here, you've got to make that bridge. Well, then it starts to get you to say, so what do I need to change in order to be able to write that ending, that fairy tale ending at the end of the book, that choose your own adventure? I want to start writing the pages myself.
Yes.
But then you can start asking yourself the questions, well, what do I need to change in order to get there, right? The story starts to come alive to you. And I think that's a really, really important thing.
The story.
The narratives that we had as that 12-year-old who says, I can only do 50 juggles, right? That needs to now change to 75. I've kind of visited that analogy a couple of times here, but it's the same thing, right? The narrative has to shift. So how do I change the story to lead me in the direction of where I want to go? That's the next step, right? Data first. Where are you? And what story do I want to start to create? That's
100%. And therein lies the key to success.
Mhm.
It's about, which story do I want to create? Do I want to create more of the story of where I'm at? Obviously, it's not a happy one, or I wouldn't be wanting to leave it, right? Or maybe it's just not enough. Maybe I've outgrown it. So you have to ask it for a new awareness, first of all, and then ask for that use of that tool to get you into that next result.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
So what story do you want to tell? Because we live and die by the quality of our stories all day long.
Absolutely. Right. I mean, even just in personal, I mean, between myself and my spouse, between myself and my kids and my parents and in-laws and neighbors, right? we already have this story of how, before your neighbor walks up to you, you may get along, you may not get along with them. But that story is already in your head. The neighbor to the east, the neighbor to the west. I don't like this person. I do like this person. As soon
Mhm.
as you approach the situation, the context is already set. So if you really want to become friends with that neighbor you didn't like, you got to change that story before you're going to be able to start to like them and before you get along with them, right?
Yeah, it requires an openness.
Yeah,
So maybe what happens, what you're saying is having the data gives a portal into new awareness of what's possible
that's right.
instead of feeling stuck in what is. Because, typically that's what we're dealing with is they just feel stuck. It's like, how do we get past this? If we could just get past this one choke point, things would open up and the organization would grow. If we could, particularly if it's an organization that has a revenue stream that is experiencing a slowdown, then maybe they have other revenue streams that are dormant or that could be kickstarted, that could be given more attention and would develop more, or maybe they just have to create a whole new revenue stream.
Hmm.
And as markets change, that's always a situation. That's, there's waves and there's cycles and there's things come and go. So having the information to help you get past those choke points, I think, is really the key here.
Yeah, my mom used to tell me when I was a little kid, she said necessity is the mother of invention, right?
Yeah.
If I know where I want to go, I will find a way to figure it out. I mean, I may not have the answer myself, but I have 100 people or 10 people or people on the street that I'll ask everybody because I've got to do it. So if you know where you are and you know where you want to go, you'll find a way to get there. And I think that was a big challenge for me. Just sort of that self-reliance, just that self-confidence. I didn't believe I was MacGyver, right? I could figure out anything. It'll happen. It may not happen immediately, but it'll happen if you,
100%.
right?
And in the process of all of that is the personal growth.
That's right.
Isn't that true?
That's right. At some point in time, MacGyver believed that he could fix anything, right? You could have
Yeah.
bubble gum and a ballpoint pen, and he would fix a cruise ship with it on the show because he's like, you know what? I'll figure it out. I'll
I'll
figure
just
it out.
do this. Yeah, I think that's a real core cultivation
Mhm.
that needs to take place forever. Like that's a forever thing.
Yeah.
It's not just something you do once. It's interesting to me when I'm coaching leadership teams, many times they're like, okay, we're going to do this. Everything's going to be fixed. I get this word fix a lot. Like, can you come in and fix this? And my response is, tell me where you want to be and I'll take you there instead of focusing on fixing something. Because I feel like the only reason they feel like things need to be fixed is because they want to grow. So they look at where they're at as being wrong. Do you see that too?
Yeah, and I think we were talking sort of pre-show here a little bit. There's three questions or three words that I think
Yes.
they have to go in the right sequence, and people tend to look backwards, or at least I used to. And the three words are in the sequence are why, what, and how. And what I didn't tell you in the beginning was I think of why as going 0 to 1. It's never been created before. It's a brand new space, right?
Mhm.
That's where the growth, because that's the mother of all invention right there, right? I
Yeah.
got to get to a new place. Well, then 1 to 20 is when you're building the prototype or you're creating the new product or the new service, right? You're still trying to get an understanding of what it is that you've got a gut feeling like, yeah, that's right. That's what I want. Right. And then how is I start cranking the wheel saying, I'm going to make 21 to 10,000 of these things or do this service over and over again for my customers. And I
Sure.
think so many people start with that. I need to fix something, to your point, right?
Mhm.
How do I do it? Well, you miss the purpose because you're putting a band-aid on a problem as opposed to finding out systemically where the issue exists. So you can
Sure.
have all of those things be addressed all at once. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And most of the time I find when I get them focused on where they want to go,
Hmm.
like some kind of end goal, and it's not the end goal of all end goals. It's the end goal that they can move toward in this phase of growth.
Right.
And I think this is the distinction. It's that this is a never-ending story. We don't just run the data once and then we're good. It's like you have to constantly be measuring because it's a feedback tool. Like it's a feedback loop. And if you don't have an exit on your feedback loop, you just repeat patterns, repeat failures, repeat choke points, because they'll keep presenting themselves until you have that exit out of the loop. And that's true of thinking, that's true of behavior, that's true of leadership style, that's true of any kind of growth in any sort of economy, regardless what's going to come along your path. Being willing is the first step. And then the second step is desirous of having more awareness, which is what the data brings in for you. Then you can actually do something with that. But I see oftentimes without that feedback, just this kind of sense of defeat. And then they get stuck in asking the how. Well, how are we going to fix this? How are we going to get past this? How are we going to change this? And the key thing is you don't know how. You don't know how because you haven't focused on what you want yet.
So let's take something I think that's probably a routine to a lot of us and very commonplace, and that is getting on an on-ramp to and data in this case is the tach or the speedometer that tells you how fast you're going. I would say probably in the last 15 times I've gotten on a highway, every situation is slightly different in terms of how fast I got to go and when do I want to merge, based on the fact that it's an 18-wheeler that's barreling down the right lane at 80 miles an hour. Well, that's going to change how I accelerate to get into traffic.
Indeed.
Right? Or it's just a small motorcycle, but then there's a Suburban or, whatever. The situation is always different, right? And throughout the course of that, I am constantly modulating my pace by pressing on the brake or the accelerator to try to get onto the on-ramp, because I decide that, hey, it's 65 miles an hour and 70 is the right speed for me. That's what I've got to decide. So I think so many times looking at data and saying, oh, this is a failure, that's like looking at the speedometer halfway onto the on-ramp and saying, I'm only at 35 miles an hour. I'm terrible. I'm never going to make it onto the on-ramp.
I failed my entry.
It's on the journey. It's not the end point.
That's right.
You're still accelerating. You're still braking to time that your entry into the highway.
There's a lot of focus, I think, that goes into what's not working. I see that we have this sort of, it's like a social or societal kind of structure around looking at what's not working. And interestingly enough, when we look at the human brain and the neuroscience behind how our brain fires, we actually have basically two neurons, just to kind of chunk it down to make a point. We have D1 and D2, and one is a negative sort of element of always looking at what doesn't work and what can't be done. And then we have the D1 neurons that are always about the yes factor. The challenge for us as human beings is we actually have more of the D2, if we want to say those are the no, the no neurons. And so it's kind of almost like, the odds are stacked against us a little bit. So we do have to put some extra attention and focus into what we want as an outcome, rather than looking at what is and how what is doesn't work. And when we shift that focus, to use your car analogy, it's like, do you want to drive down the freeway looking in the rearview mirror? Or do you want to drive down the freeway looking out the windshield?
Looking in the rearview mirror sounds a little dangerous.
It sounds pretty scary. Yeah, it sounds pretty scary. So it is all about that, and being flexible, let's say, in how looking at the data is approached and what meaning we give that data, so that we understand it's a journey, it's a story, and we get to write the story however we want to write it, and we can change that at any point.
Yeah. So let's kind of incorporate those three elements into that on-ramp, right? So the data is the speedometer telling you how fast you're going. I'm at 25 miles an hour, 3/4 of the way up the on-ramp. Hey, I need to get on the gas here because I'm not going to be able to make it into traffic. Or maybe that was intentional because there's a huge wave of vehicles coming. I want to slot in right behind them. That, but in order to be able to know that I need to slot in behind them, I need to know why I want to do something, what I want to do, where do I want to be? Am I kind of just that speed racer who always wants to be in front of people? Well, I better get on the gas ASAP, because that's what matters to me. But it all starts from that desire of where you want to be relative to what's happening to the market, right? Or the traffic in this case.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you can take the data, that speedometer, that kind of tells you where you are. It's not a failure. It's just a fact, right? Good or bad, it is just a fact. You're at 35 miles an hour at that point, at that time. Now, do I want to go faster or slower? That's the choice you get to make, but that's in the context of where do I want to end up?
Mm-hmm.
And if you can start to say, I want to end up behind the traffic, or I want to be in front of that 18-wheeler, that's the story you tell yourself. We're constantly making these stories in our head, just as I decide what I'm going to eat for lunch today. Well, I got to do a quick lunch. Well, what can I eat that's going to be a quick lunch? I've already made decisions around what I'm going to eat for lunch today based on sort of time and based on what I got to get done for that day. We're doing this thousands of times a day. It's not new. We just got to realize what happens in a small way in our life happens in a massive way in our life as well.
Yes. And so that's always been my mantra when I'm working with a client is we're going to make these tiny changes for big results.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be that bad of an experience. Like it's not going to be that uncomfortable. When we make these small changes, they're always the small change that has the greatest result in the long term and how it flushes out. And making small micro changes along the path is always easier. And it feels good because we do want to grow, we do want to adjust, but we don't want to upset the apple cart. So we want to be able to make these adjustments, and the data will show us, it'll give us the feedback as to how that's flushing out.
I think it was James Clear in Atomic Habits, the book, and he talked specifically about this idea of the United States Postal Team's bicycle team and how they were in a bad position for a long time. They hadn't won for a long time. And it was just the idea that the coach came in and said, I don't want to revamp everything by 100%. He said, 1%, 1%, 1%, 1%. Just slightly tune the knob every single day. And 100 days later, you've improved by 100%, but it's really easy and palatable. So I believe, again, trying to build this through line here. If you understand where you are, don't try to change it all, right? I'm definitely not good enough to do that myself, right? So I just try to say, if there's 10 things here, which one do I want to just change by 1%? And the next day, what do I want to change by 1%? Microscopic changes that lead to gigantic, universal kind of results. Yeah, agree 100% on that. Absolutely.
So what would you suggest in terms of the analytical side of data? Would it be on, some people can be sort of OCD about this, right? Where they're constantly looking and measuring, and if they don't see something, then they think it doesn't work. So what would you suggest in terms of using that as the feedback tool in incremental time that enables things to change in between, and we're not white knuckling it or squeezing out the possibility?
Yeah, let me tie into something that I think is very germane and very relevant to us today, which is COVID, right? It's kind of come out and it has changed the world. I think most everyone would kind of say it's changed the world in some way, right? Good or bad, that's a different discussion.
Right.
But how it's changed the world, the vaccines that have come out, the remedies, the approaches to that, there's lots of discussion. And it doesn't matter what sort of the political affiliation is, but whether the vaccines are effective or not, there's lots and lots of data. And the level of scrutiny that you've spent on the data itself, there's lots of things that can be torn apart in terms of what it says. Right? Yeah. And then in the United States, there's 330 million people alone, and there's 330 million different opinions on that same exact data.
Absolutely.
Well, how's that possible? Because the data doesn't give you answers. It simply tells you something. It just says something, and you have the option to receive it and take it. Right? So when you take a look at that data, don't take that as sort of the end point. Take it as a place of just understanding, is there an opportunity for me to shift my perspective on what is actually occurring right now? And that's the way I look at it. Every single time I look at data, I look at it as saying, what am I not seeing? What could I be seeing a completely different way? Because that's how I shift into that 1%, uh,
Yes.
perspective. Does that answer that question a bit?
That totally does. And the reason for that is I do know that people sometimes when a leader has the stakes are high and you have an organization and you've got people pushing at you and maybe you have investors that are constantly on your tail, being healthy about how you let this influence, everything about what you're doing is really the key here.
Yeah, I a little earlier I said I specifically chose that word effective versus efficient. For me, efficient is about cranking that wheel. And I'll say as a 22-year-old working, getting my first job, if they told me to turn that wheel 10 times, I was trying to do 12 or 13 or 17 or 18 because more effort is what was good. Now I don't have the energy levels that I did as a 22 or 24-year-old. So for me, what's more interesting is how do I make 10 wheels, right? That are each being cranked 10 times. So that's more effective. I'm trying to create new space. So as a leader for myself, I'm not constantly asking them, how do we do more of that? Is that the thing that we really want to be doing? Because
Really good.
if I know what my endpoint is, I'm constantly questioning, not am I on the right path so much as the steps I'm taking, are they effective in reaching that point that I want to get to? Gosh, I am so surprised that I'll have junior folks on my team who've been working in the workplace for 2 or 3 years, and they'll say, "But why are we doing that, Vinay?" I'm like, "Well, hold on a second. I've been working for 28 years here. I got plenty of experience. Like, but this doesn't make any sense." Holy shit! Yeah, you're right. It doesn't make any sense.
Just been doing it that way.
That's right. That's the narrative. That's the 12-year-old still coming out at me, right?
Totally.
Time to shift the narrative. So data is an opportunity, and it's in what I love about it. It levels the playing field, right? It doesn't matter how much experience you have or how much you do have. It gives the opportunity for everyone on your team to say, "I got a question. Why are we doing it that way?" Because they see stuff I can't see, and all of a sudden I get to claim the benefit for all of that. That's what to me is a good leader, is that all the people on my team get to make me look good all the time. That's basically what they do.
Yeah, and that is the true definition of leadership, is to empower others to lead.
Yeah.
There's a big difference between being an entrepreneur and being a leader, and one's not good or bad. They're just different.
It just is.
Yeah, they're just different. And that's often the big choke point when an entrepreneur is ready to scale their business, is being able to let go.
Yeah.
To let go of having to do everything, to let go of having to control everything, because the stakes are very high. If that person you bring in that you delegate to doesn't do things effectively, they're never going to do things the way you're going to do them as an entrepreneur, because we all have our own way. And that's another big shift, is being able to accept that other people are going to handle a particular task or role their way, not your way, and giving them the creative space. See, I think business is very creative. I think that, we've really missed the boat on this notion that creativity is only in the arts. I think business is extremely creative.
I agree with you 100%. There's one little thing I'd like to add to that. This is something that I tell my kids all the time. As soon as you tell someone how to do something, just look at that for a moment and inspect that for the fact that what a sign of arrogance, right? As in, I know what the process is, so there's no way to make that better. And they said, no. I said, not even a 1% chance? Well, I mean, maybe a 1% chance. Well, then do you know what that 1% chance is that you can make it better? Because if there's 1%, just 1% every day, right?
Yes.
So when you are scared to relinquish control to someone else, that's because you believe that there's no other way better to do it. You're not looking for a better answer. That is a true
Always.
sign of arrogance, right?
Yeah, well, and it comes from fear.
Hmm?
All arrogance comes from fear.
Oh, and I have it all the time, right? I try to catch myself.
Well, that's the key. At least you're willing to be self-reflective enough to, first of all, acknowledge that you do it all the time, and then secondly, to shift it, because that's really the answer. I mean, It comes out of a place of, I have to get this done. I have to get this right. And this is part of, growing my business and my profitability. So oftentimes that's what we would call like an away from driver, driven by the fear of loss. So of course, the arrogance has to kick into, it's the ego.
That's true.
It's, you wouldn't be able to get out on that soccer field and perform if you didn't have some ego. I think we can all just kind of be a little kinder to ourselves about when we slide into those 3D ways of thinking and getting through life, because it's the norm.
And something I struggle a lot with myself is the difference between arrogance and confidence. And I think
Mhm.
part of this is, I mean, I probably spent the better part of 2 years just asking everybody I could find because it was necessary for me to find the answer, right? And one of the things that I think I found in that process, I tend to always try to put things into buckets because it's so much easier when things
Well,
are
you're a
good or
data
bad,
guy.
right? That's right. And
You're a data guy.
the fact is the ego is not good or bad. It's right in the middle, right? I need to have a desire to be able to build an endpoint to get to. Well, that's ego, right? I want. But at the same time, it's the ego that prevents me from getting there because it says, I know, right?
Right.
If you live in the world of I want, and you can say to others, hey, can you help me? Because I want to do that. And I'm not quite sure how I'm going to get there. Oh my gosh, that's an expansive ego, right? That works to the benefit of everyone as opposed to just yourself.
Mhm.
And you invite them along in that journey. And I think that's a better way of doing things in my perspective of the world.
Yeah, well, that's the key to growth, right? So I want, and I know. I think I know is very healthy, because you
Mhm.
have to, there's different levels of consciousness, let's say.
Yeah,
So there's, hope, belief, know. So when you know, then it's like you trust yourself
correct.
and you have faith in your desire and your outcome. Taking it a step further of, I know, and what else is possible, or
Correct.
what haven't I thought of yet, or who could contribute to this. Contribution is the key. We have a tendency to overlook this, I think, in the business world. It seems to be more of a intimate relational kind of thing, but in the business world, contribution is the key. What can I contribute to this? When I wake up in the morning, I say to myself, whose life can I bless today? Right? Because that's a contribution. What contribution can I bring to the planet, to the world, to people, to humanity, to this business? And then, taking it a step further, it's like, what are my connection points here? What are my points of connection? And with my team, how do I connect with this person? On what level do I need to have things shift in order for me to have a deeper connection with this person? Because we're social animals, and we will always perform greater and find ways to expand ourselves when we're contributing and connecting with other people in our team. And there's some sort of, emotive kind of feeling, like it's the feeling that gets us going, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think back sort of when I used to run track or play soccer. I mean, I've used lots of sports analogies today, but yeah, I mean, if I was a 400-meter dash runner, I'm not well suited because the way I do is not well suited for the 100. It's not well suited for the long jump, nor is it for the 1600-meter dash, right? Or they're different types of people. So I know that I'm good at the 400. That's my lane, right?
Yeah.
And knowing that I'm not 800 and 1600 is just as valuable. It's not that I'm not good at 400. It just means that this is what I am. And
You
that's
know
what
where
I
you're
know.
at. Yeah. So for me, it was the long jump and the triple jump.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. I can relate to that because you're telling your track stories. And I was thinking back to when I was a kid. I lived on a farm, and, I rode the school bus every day to school. And so I didn't get a lot of time on the track to practice after school. And so in the springtime, my mom would till the garden so the earth was soft,
Okay.
and I would mark it out until things were planted, and then I had to find a new spot. But I would mark it out, and I would come home from school, and I'd get off the bus, and I'd kick off my shoes, and I'd practice in like the soft earth. And it was beautiful. It was a beautiful experience. And
Necessity is the mother of invention, right?
it totally is. I mean, I was so resourceful. I still am. And that's how I discovered that it really was the triple jump with where I really would shine. And so there was a little bit of data proof for you right there. It's like
Yeah.
I couldn't, I could do the long jump, but man, I could do a mean triple jump. I always won.
So, something I'd love to bring up, and you and I have talked a couple of times, and there's this assessment that you've built, right? That leadership assessment. Just as, I always like to think in terms of sort of concrete endpoints to sort of think of a placeholder in my mind. I mean, in that assessment that you've built, what it gives people the ability to do is find out where they are as an individual on all these different dimensions of leadership. And then they can, now that you're aware of it, you can start to say, all right, I understand what it is now. Now, what am I going to do with it? Where do I want to go with this? How do I get there? And that's what I actually love about that assessment that you created. I'm assuming that you'll give people a link to it for hopefully they're very curious about what it is.
Yes.
It's those 15 dimensions of looking into someone as an individual, because leadership to me, leadership and being a human are the same thing, right?
Yeah, there's no gap between that. Yeah, absolutely.
But your 15 questions gives them a snapshot into who they are right now. It takes 5-10 minutes to if that to fill it out. But now you can start to see how do I write that ending, because I know what page I'm on in the book right now, right?
It really does. And this particular one that you're referencing is all about mindset. I can create an assessment for pretty much anything in an organization and be able to gather that data. But this one in particular is all about the mindset of a leader. And I think that's always the starting point, mindsets. Success is like 99% mindset and then 1% action. And when you have the mindset dialed in, that 1% action is massively impactful.
It's facilitated, right? Easily facilitated.
Exactly. You're facilitating the process of success in your life. And so when people look at that and they get the feedback on it, when the leaders are seeing, oh, here's a little gap in my mindset, I'm really not that aligned with this particular outcome. And then we can show where this is affecting the team. So if the leadership isn't aligned with the outcome, this is one example, there could be many misalignments along the path. But if, let's say, they're not aligned with an outcome on a particular project, that is going to have a trickle through effect in terms of everyone on the team. So it's going to create all sorts of feedback that might be dissonance within your team of people seeing the disconnect and not really knowing how to handle that, or seeing that there's a misalignment and not everybody's on the same page. So it's a wonderful way of getting everybody on the same page. And when you've got all the horses on a team pulling the same direction, things really move, like the needle moves quickly.
Yeah, I mean, what an important point there, right? I mean, if there's a way you can assess for each individual where they are, right, with that data, as an organization, you can kind of just say, where are we as a organization?
Yeah.
And you can start to go and start to build this vision that everyone's starting to run. Everyone is aligned. I mean, in the world of physics, they call that a super magnet, right? When everything is aligned, there's no heat, there's no friction. It is so elegantly profound in how incredibly well it's almost supernatural the way superconducting magnets work in the world of physics. Just imagine if you could run, the analogy I make for people is, would you rather be a 300 watt light bulb, which is a very powerful light bulb, or a 300 watt laser that can burn through steel, right?
Exactly.
Burn through sheet steel. It's the same amount of power. But if you start to find this alignment amongst all these people and you have that common goal, you become that 300 watt laser, which is, again, same amount of energy, but completely more potent in terms of what it can do.
Indeed. And so it doesn't mean that your people are wrong or bad, or maybe they just need more training, or they need more communication, or maybe everybody needs to get together and the vision needs to be mapped out a little more clearly. But the feedback is there, so the adjustments can be made. And that's really the key.
Yeah. And I think that's what you do so well, right? You take the time to work with people to help them understand, here's where you are. Let's kind of come up together. You don't want to run the race for them. You want to coach them in running that race to get to that end point, which is, I think, what it's hard to get outside of yourself sometimes. I know that for a fact.
I think we all know that. If you even have a smidgen of self-awareness, you know that, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Vinay, for coming on today. This has been a great conversation, and I hope it's, helped all the CEOs in the world that are struggling right now. Everybody's been impacted by what we've gone through the last couple of years. Who are we kidding? And, industries are suffering, and it's also a wonderful time in history in terms of what do you really want to create here, and just getting the dots lined up and getting the feedback to help you get to the next level. So really appreciate you being here and helping unpack that.
I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you. I always enjoy our conversations.
Yeah, they're fun, aren't they? They're always fun. So thank you everyone for being here today. And I'll make sure that the link for the assessment goes in the show notes, and the recording will be up real soon. And remember, stay aligned, stay awake, and stay sovereign.